Palm Sunday, the Triumphal Entry. We're doing it from John. There are stories around the Triumphal Entry that kind of frame it. And I'm going to bounce back and forth in John chapter 12 today to take maybe a different kind of, maybe not different, but what the Lord has laid on my heart to look at this today. First, let's just read it. John chapter 12. We're going to start in verse 12, and then we're going to, like I say, bounce around a little bit. It says, "The next day, the great crowd that had come for the festival heard that Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem. They took palm branches and went out to meet him, shouting, 'Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the King of Israel.'" And we're going to come back to that a little bit, but I want to go a little bit ahead here, and because I want to explain this part, and then we'll move on. It says, "Jesus found a young donkey and sat on it, as it is written, 'Do not be afraid, daughter Zion. See, your king is coming, seated on a donkey's colt.'" And just talk about him coming on a donkey for a minute and do this kind of briefly. Most of you probably recognize this, maybe you don't, but it's part of the whole point that we're getting to today. First of all, Jesus is the point of all of it, okay? Let's just get that right out there. But sitting on a donkey, and the palm branches as well, this represented the fact that the palm branches were that the people recognized him as a king. Him sitting on a donkey, it says it was to fulfill what was written, and this was written in Zechariah 9:9, about the king coming on a donkey, the foal of a colt. He didn't come on a horse. Generally, when a king comes into battle, they come on a horse. That's the way Jesus will come next time. We'll point that out real quick. But not then. He came in humility. He came in peace, riding on the colt of a donkey. And another thing is, if you remember in this, John doesn't really go through the details of this, but to get the donkey, if you remember, Jesus sent a couple of disciples into town, and just when you see the donkey and the colt, just grab it and take it. And if anybody says anything, just tell them the Lord has need of it. And that's exactly what happened. One of the things that happens here, I should say there, over the next 5 days, is a lot of God's hand putting things in place the way they were meant to be, including putting Jesus on the cross. Okay? None of this was a mistake. None of this was Satan's victory. Every bit of it was Jesus' victory. And we'll see that as well. But I want to go back. Well, I guess I didn't do that slide. I want to go back to these couple of verses. John chapter 12, or verse 12, talks about a great crowd had come to the festival. The festival, by the way, just to make sure, if you don't know, was the Passover festival. The Passover festival was one of 3 festivals that God said that the people of Israel needed to come to Jerusalem to celebrate every year. And if you remember, the Passover was when Israel was in Egypt in bondage. God told them through Moses, you need to slaughter a lamb and put blood on the doorposts. And then when you do that, the angel of death is going to come through that night, and he's going to kill all of the firstborn of anybody who doesn't have that blood on the doorposts. And with the blood on the doorpost, and the angel of death came through and passed over those houses. That's where the name Passover comes from. And that's what we celebrate next Sunday, is the slaughter of the true lamb and his blood being on essentially the doorposts of our hearts, okay? And that takes us out of the bondage of the world. They celebrated it as they're really the beginning of Israel as a nation when they came out of Egypt and became their own, okay? So it was a big celebration, and there were a lot of people there. And this year, at that festival, they all heard that Jesus was coming. So they were excited to go see Jesus. Now listen. Let me get myself caught up here. Well, we'll leave it there for a minute. Jesus was popular. His popularity at this point in time had reached just an immense level. Everybody wanted a piece of Jesus. And they're singing and they're shouting and they're saying, Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna, by the way, that whole phrase in there comes out of Psalm 118. Hosanna means save us. And the passage in Psalm 118, you don't have to turn there, but you can look there later. It's not just Hosanna. It is a plea, almost a begging plea to Yahweh. Save us, God. Save us from the difficulties that we're in. Remember this about the Jewish people at this time. They were under oppression and essentially captivity under the Roman Empire. And they saw Jesus as the Messiah, and they were looking for him to save them from the oppression that they were living in. And they saw him as the Messiah that had been promised that was going to deliver them from the oppression of the Roman Empire. And they didn't know how, but they figured as he's coming into town this year for the festival that it was time for him to do what it was they anticipated him doing. Out of this crowd, out of this group, out of all of these people today, as we look at John chapter 12, I want to do a comparison of some of the different people and some of the different attitudes and some of the different expectations and the ways that different people looked to Jesus during this time. So we're going to go back up to John chapter 12, verse 1. And it says 6 days before the Passover. Now we've got some time frame here. The next, as we started in verse 12, it says the next day. So the day before that is the sixth day, which would be the Saturday before Jesus goes to the cross. Just a few days before he goes to the cross, and essentially a week before he walks out of the grave. Okay, there's our time frame. 6 days before the Passover, the day before the Triumphal Entry, Jesus came to Bethany where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus raised from the dead. Now, Bethany was just outside of Jerusalem. This is the place where Jesus would stay the night for most of the next 4 or 5 days until we got to Thursday, when he would have the Last Supper, and then they would go out to the garden, and then he would be arrested, and the trials would happen, okay? But he's at Bethany, where Lazarus lived. Now, Jesus has been at Lazarus' house a couple of times. Obviously, he raised him from the dead, and there's another time he was there, and Lazarus' sisters, you remember them, but Mary and Martha, okay? Mary and Martha. And just to put some context in this, we all remember, I think, the story of Mary and Martha, one of the first times that we're told about Jesus being there. Martha was running around doing stuff, being really busy, and Mary was just sitting at Jesus' feet. I know I see a lot of people going, oh, don't be talking about that one again. But Martha complains because Mary, she's not helping. And Jesus basically kind of tells Martha, pipe down. My own language, not his. Don't worry yourself about it. He said, she is doing the right thing by worshiping me. Okay? These are the same people that we're talking about here. Where am I at? What? There we go. Sorry. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. So that's where he's at. And here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Guess what? Martha served, while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Sound familiar? Then Mary, what does Mary do? Mary took a pint of pure nard, or what we would call today spikenard. Spikenard, it's a spice. It's an expensive perfume. And she poured it out on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with fragrance of the perfume. The first person that I want to look at in our comparison today is Mary. You know, I being who I am, I thought about this and I wanted to bring Mary in last, because in all of the people that we're going to look at today, this is the way we should all be. Feels more like a conclusion than a beginning. But what we're doing here, and I think what the Holy Spirit does here, is He sets her up first so that we can see where we should be. And when I worked at Sears many years ago, we learned how to sell things. We would call it selling up by selling down. You come in to buy a refrigerator, we don't take you to the cheap refrigerator first. We take you to the Cadillac of refrigerators. And we show you all these amazing features and benefits that you get from this amazing refrigerator, which there's no way you can afford. So we start moving down the line, and you start to get to where you want some of those features, and where you came in to just buy the basic model, you're somewhere in the middle now, because there were some features that we sold you on, right? That's the idea, I think, here. We're looking at how we should be. We may not be there, but this is what we want to be. Mary took this expensive perfume. We'll see here in a minute. It was worth about a year's worth of wages. This wasn't just, I got some perfume in the back, let me do a thing. This was expensive stuff. And she poured it on Jesus' feet. A pint of it. She sacrificed to come to the feet of Jesus. Many scholars think that this was like her life savings, that she had bought this to put aside so that later on she could sell bits and pieces to survive in later years. Like we would do our 401ks. It's like taking your whole life savings and just putting it at Jesus' feet. And the spikenard, I had some up here. I think I gave it away. I could have let you all smell it a little bit. I thought about just throwing it down the aisle this morning so we could permeate the room, which is what happened when she did this. The smell of it is amazing. It smells really good. And she wiped his feet with her hair. Listen, in that culture, you didn't do stuff like that. A woman's hair was to be kept away. You weren't supposed to even see it. And she let it all out with all these people around, and she wiped that nard off of Jesus' feet out of devotion and worship and love. Think about Mary for a minute. How much she loved Jesus. We talked about the story of her worshiping while Martha was working that one day. And then Jesus had just recently raised her brother from the dead. It's a pretty amazing thing Jesus did for her. And her love for Jesus was such that she was willing to sacrifice everything she had and even her whole own honor to be shamed just to worship at Jesus' feet. That's the Cadillac of worshiping Jesus, my friends. But we're going to have our first comparison here. One of Jesus' disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It's worth a year's wages. That's where we get that, okay? I didn't just make it up. But listen, Judas didn't say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. Listen, here's the thing that I want to warn us against today. We do this comparison, and we look at Judas and we go, boy, I sure am glad I'm not Judas. But I want you to consider Judas for a minute. Judas was one of the 12 apostles that Jesus chose. And Jesus didn't just go, I'll take you, and okay, Judas, you're sitting in the front row, I'll take you. We're told in Luke chapter 6 that Jesus went up to a mountain and he prayed all night long before he chose the 12 men that he chose. He didn't take that lightly. Now listen, I don't know if at the point in time that Jesus chose Judas, he knew he would be the one that betrayed him. I don't know if he had it in mind when he chose him. I don't know when Jesus put two and two together. I don't know if Jesus saw him stealing from the money bag and thought, yeah, he's probably the guy. I think he knew somebody would betray him. None of that matters. But from Judas's standpoint, Judas was a believer. He was a follower. He was there. Listen, Jesus took his apostles. Remember, one day he gave them power and authority, and he sent them out to the villages around, and he gave them the ability to heal the sick, cast out demons, and raise the dead. Judas had all that. Judas experienced all that. Judas knew who Jesus was. He recognized the things that Jesus did. But Judas had a problem with his self. See, Judas was greedy. And Judas never dealt with that issue in his life to put aside the greed, and he gave the devil a foothold in his life through that sin. And we're told that when Judas went away, the devil entered him because he had a foothold in Judas's life. Remember this. We can point a finger at Judas all day long, but as believers, sometimes we allow sin to mingle in our lives. And when we do that, we give the devil an opportunity, which we're told in Ephesians, don't give the devil an opportunity. Because as we've seen and we've witnessed, and I now have witnessed so many times, when the devil has an opportunity, he likes to take it. And he does not play fair at all. Sorry, I got locked out here. So I'm telling you today, as we go through this list with Judas and the others, don't let yourself just kind of go to sleep on this. Examine your hearts. Examine your lives. Are you letting some sin hang around? Don't do it. Don't do it. We know where Judas went. We know what happened with Judas. We know that he betrays Jesus. But I don't think he betrayed Jesus because he was an evil person. I think he expected Jesus to be the Messiah, to do something about this Rome problem that the Jews had, and it wasn't happening. And so Judas thought, well, if I hand him over to the Pharisees, maybe that'll jumpstart the whole thing. I believe that because when Judas saw what ultimately happened through his betrayal, that they put Jesus on a cross, he was sorry for what he did. He took the money back to the Pharisees and threw it on the ground in the temple, and eventually went out and hung himself because he felt so bad about what happened because of what he did. Judas never got a hold, even though he knew who Jesus was and he saw what Jesus did and he believed that he was the Messiah. He didn't commit his life to Jesus. And ultimately he lost it. Judas. Jesus responds to Judas and he says, "Leave her alone." Jesus replied, "It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. You'll always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me." Where am I at? In church. That's good. All right, that's it. I read through more than I had up on the screen. We're going to jump we got Judas, we've got Mary. Next, we're going to look at a crowd that hung around. What I call the Bethany crowd. Well, that's what I was looking for. There we are. Leave her alone. It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. You'll always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me. In verse 9, a large crowd of Jews found out that Jesus was there, and they came not only because of him, but also to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. Can you imagine? I would want to see that. Raise somebody from the dead? If I heard that somebody got raised from the dead and they were around me, I would want to go see for myself. I've heard stories, even more modern day stories, of people being raised from the dead, and that's intriguing to me. That'd be cool to see, right? And that's what this crowd was there for. They were there to see the cool thing that Jesus did. I'm reminded of when Jesus fed the 5,000. What an awesome thing that was. Just a few loaves and some fish and all these people, and he feeds all the people. And then we're told that the next day the people came looking for him. They wanted to see him do it again. And Jesus told them, "You're missing the point. It's not about the stuff I can do." So here in the Lazarus crowd, we have a people that saw what Jesus did or heard what Jesus did, and they were intrigued, but they didn't really get who Jesus was. They just wanted to see him for the stuff he could do. Again, I want to caution us. How often do we think, wow, it would be really cool if Jesus would do some stuff? If he would heal the sick, if he would free us from the oppressions that we face. And we come to Jesus for all this stuff, but we're not like Mary, who gives everything she has to worship at the feet of Jesus. It's a selfish thing. Let's go on. Where am I at? We see this large crowd again on the next day after during the fanfare of the branches and the hosannas. And it says that the crowd that was with him when he called Lazarus from the tomb and raised him from the dead continued to spread the word. So many people, because they heard that he had performed this sign, went out to meet him. People wanted to see him for what he could do, not necessarily for what he was and wanted to be in their lives. You get the difference? You understand? The chief priests and the Pharisees. I'm jumping around a little bit, so we're at verse 10. Right after verse 9, we're told that the chief priests planned to kill Lazarus as well. Why? For on account of him, many Jews were going over to Jesus and believing in him. Again, we see them during the day of the hosannas. And the Pharisees said to one another, "See, this is all these people, all this going on, people about Lazarus, people about whatever it is." They said, "This is going nowhere. Look how the whole world has gone after him." The chief priests, the Pharisees, they knew who he was too. They saw what he could do, and they were threatened by him. These were the religious leaders. Again, we get these pictures of these evil people. Oh, we're going to put Jesus on the cross. But remember, before Jesus showed up, Everybody was coming to them for the religious answers. How do we worship God? And these were the guys. The chief priests, you come into the temple, they were the ones doing the sacrifices. They were the ones teaching in church. They were the ones that you came to when you had a problem. They weren't evil people, so to speak. Jesus called them, you look good on the outside, but inside your hearts are like vipers. You look good on the outside, but inside you're dead bones. That's what these people were like. And again, we point our fingers. Glad I'm not one of them. But how often in our lives do we rely on religious practices and not on what Jesus wants to do in our lives? We get in these closed boxes. I was talking to somebody about that this week. I think it was maybe Joni. We have these expectations. We have these ways that we think God works. We learn it through church. We learn it through society, through culture. And don't tell me anything outside of what I know. I live so much of my Christian life in one of those boxes. And I tried so hard to always pull God into that box with me. God keeps saying, I don't always do things the way you think I'm going to do them. The chief priests and the Pharisees, they plotted to kill him. They wanted to kill Lazarus because they were threatened. Jesus represented something that took away from what they had built up in their lives. And that's what religion is for us, okay? And we go back to 12 and... Oh, yeah. There's another group of people. From amongst the Pharisees, listen to this. It's a little bit long. Even after Jesus... Let me find it here. Even after Jesus had performed so many signs in their presence, they still would not believe in him. This was to fulfill the word of Isaiah the prophet. Again, you got people who are looking at what he does, but they're not believing in him. To fulfill what was in the word of Isaiah the prophet. Lord, who has believed our message? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He goes on to say, for this reason they could not believe, because as Isaiah says elsewhere, he has blinded their eyes and hardened their hearts, so they can neither see with their eyes, nor understand with their hearts, nor turn, and I would heal them. There's a warning in this, by the way, as an aside. Sometimes we think, you know what, I know I'm not where God wants me to be, but I'm not really ready to go there yet. I'll just try to, keep him on the fringes as I still continue to do my own thing. This is a warning against that. The day may not come for you to be able to finally decide, you know what? Okay, God, I'll let you have your way. Maybe it's because of death. And maybe it's just because at some point in time, God says, you know what? You've had your opportunities. And your heart goes hard. I'm not going to say that I'm going to point to people, but I know people who this could have happened to, who seem like their hearts are so hard they just won't listen anymore, who seem like their eyes are closed and they're just not looking. I mean, we can pray for God to soften their hearts and give them eyes that can see and ears that can hear. But it's a scary thing to consider for ourselves. If we think we can put off total surrender to Jesus, man, that's a dangerous way of thinking. Dangerous way of thinking. Yet, it says in verse 42, at the same time, many, even among the leaders, believed in him. Even among the leaders, people believed in him. But because of the Pharisees, they would not openly acknowledge their faith. for fear they would be put out of the synagogue. You can imagine that, right? Maybe we even experience that in our lives. We know what we believe, but we're not going to go out in the world and live it and confess it and let other people know that we believe. I mean, I might find some fluffy ways that I can do that people won't, say things about me. And today, I mean, it's not like we're worried about our church. We're not going to put you out of church, out of this church, if you believe in Jesus and follow him. But in the synagogues, that would have been a problem, because the Pharisees led it, and they didn't believe in Jesus. They were threatened by him. But here's the problem with these people. They love human praise. Why does this keep bouncing around for me? Here we go. They love human praise more than praise from God. I need to pay attention to the screen a little more instead of what I'm looking at. They loved human praise more than praise from God. I'm guilty of that from time to time. And I know you all are too. We believe, but we're more worried about what people think. We're more worried about what it's going to look like than pleasing God. And that's not what Jesus calls us to do, to give everything in surrender and sacrificially come to the feet of Jesus and worship. All right, now back to the great crowd, I think. Back in verse 12, this is where we started. The next day, Triumphal Entry Day. I hope I'm not confusing you all. It seemed clear when I put it together. The great crowd that had come for the festival heard that Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem. And they took palm branches and they went out to meet him, shouting, Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the King of Israel. Here again, much like Judas, these people, most of them, Jewish people, knew that Jesus was going to be there, had heard or seen the things that Jesus had done, and in so doing, knowing Scripture the way that they did, they believed he was the Messiah. But they were looking for the wrong things. This crowd, this very same crowd, in a matter of about 5 days, is going to be shouting, crucify him. Crucify him. There's going to be a change of heart. Why? Why? Because to take it from belief to surrender, that's where the block comes. These people had expectations. They thought they knew how God was going to do things. We know some prophecy today, right? We know how all this worked out. We can see that the hosannas and the donkey and the blind eyes and all of these things were fulfillments of prophecy. They didn't recognize it while it was going on around them because it didn't happen the way they thought it would. I was thinking this morning, we all have these visions of, heaven and streets of gold and mansions and this wonderful thing someday when we get to see Jesus. And I'm not saying that that's not true. But I'm also saying that we think that we just have this wonderful path to heaven, and it's probably not going to be the way that we think it's going to be. It's probably going to be a lot more. And when God reveals the truth of what he's going to do in the future, we're going to go, wow, that was cool. Instead, we think we got it figured out. We think we know what we were doing. One of the other, in Matthew, when Matthew gives us the story of the Triumphal Entry, he prefaces that with a parable. I love the parables. The parable that he prefaces this day with is the parable of the talents or the minas, or let's just put it, bags of money. And I'll summarize the story. A servant going away on a journey, and he gives bags of money to his servants. A master goes away and gives this to his servants. To one he gives 5 bags, to one he gives 3, to one he gives 1. And basically, the one with 5 goes out and uses that 5 to earn 5 more. And when the master comes back, he says, "Well done. You've done a good job. Enter into the joy of my kingdom." Same thing with the one with 3 bags. He takes it out and earns 3 more. And the master is thrilled and brings him into the joy. The other one, who is a servant, just like the others, but he is afraid of what Jesus or what the master will do. So he takes what the master has given him and he hides it away. He doesn't do anything with it. And Jesus doesn't just scold this servant. He calls him an evil servant. And instead of coming into the joy of the Lord, he says, "You go out in the darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth." Here's the lesson. If we take what Jesus has given us, and he's given us a lot, and we don't do anything with it, I don't know that we get to walk off into streets of gold and mansions. We may wind up in the darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. The point is, don't let yourself become so sure of your future that you let go of what Jesus is trying to do right now. There's another parable Jesus tells about the sheep and the goats, and he separates all of it. This is the end of time. Jesus separates the sheep and the goats, some to his right, some to his left. And to one group he says, you come in with me because you fed me, you clothed me, you helped me. And the people say, "When did we do that? I don't remember." And Jesus says, as much as you've done it to the least of my brethren, you've done it unto me. Right? That's the good stuff. But then the other group, he says, you're going away into that same darkness. Because, let's summarize it this way. Because you weren't there for me when I needed you to be there for me. When the people were sick or hungry or in need, you didn't do anything about it. You weren't there for me when I needed you to be there for me. If we're not there for Jesus, when we're needed to be there for that's what Judas was. Judas was there all the way until Jesus needed him. And then he went his own way. Be careful, my friends. That's the point of Jesus' parables, is to be careful. Don't let yourself be caught on the wrong side of things because of your own selfish needs. That's pretty much how the crowd was. Now the disciples, good old disciples. Not a lot in here about them, but this is right after the rides in on the donkey. They're throwing the palms. They're doing all this stuff. And John records for us that at first his disciples did not understand all this. It was only after Jesus was glorified did they realize that these things had been written about him and that these things had been done to him. The disciples knew who he was, saw what he did, believed in him, and wanted to follow him. Listen, even they tripped up. We're told in Matthew that eventually everybody left Jesus alone. All the disciples scattered. They were there for him when they were shouting Hosanna and throwing palm branches on the ground, but when they were crying, "Crucify him," the disciples were nowhere to be found. You know what, though? They didn't give up. Even after denying and running and leaving, they came back because they never stopped seeking and they never stopped trying. We've talked about this a lot over the last couple of weeks, but this fast that we're all on, we talked about it one day. I can't tell you how many times this week I've heard people say, I can't do this anymore. It's been one of those weeks. We're just ready to give up all over the place. But listen to me. We need to be the kind of people that when Jesus needs us, we're there. The only way that happens is if we get out of ourselves. The disciples had to learn this yet. Jesus knew that. There's another group of people that were there. We'll hit this real quick. These were Greeks, Gentiles. I love this. Right? This is not just a Jewish thing. And already we're seeing signs of that. There were Greeks amongst those who went up to worship at the festival. And they came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, with a request. Sir, they said, we would like to see Jesus. Even the Gentiles wanted a piece of him, to hang out with him, to learn from him. Now listen, Jesus, well, Philip went to Andrew. Andrew and Philip, they went and told Jesus, hey, these guys want to talk to you. We're running on time. I'm going to flip through this as quickly as I can. I promise. Y'all willing to hang in there with me for a few more? Because now we're going to look at Jesus a little bit. Jesus replied, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. This was Jesus' time. And Jesus, well, let me just keep going. I said we'll get through this quick. Jesus said, very truly, I tell you, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. You get that little parable, right? It's not easy to understand what Jesus is saying. He knew he had to die. The hour had come for him to be glorified. His glorification came in the form of a crucifixion. And before that, a whole lot of shame and grief and anguish, pain that he was going to go through over the next few days. But then from crucifixion, there was resurrection and ascension to the right hand of God. Jesus knew where he was going, which made him willing to do what it was that he did. He knew he had to die, and he knew the purpose of it, so that all of us could become a part of the kingdom. If he didn't die, it couldn't happen. And he goes on, anyone who loves their life will lose it, while anyone who hates their life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Reminiscent of Jesus in the book of Matthew, saying, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny himself, die to self, take up their cross and follow me. We've talked about that a lot in the last couple of weeks. Jesus said, whoever serves me must follow me. And where I am, my servant also will be. That's why we got to take up our cross, because he took up his. That's why we got to have a servant's heart, because he had a servant's heart. And my Father will honor those who serve me. Isn't that a beautiful promise? Listen, it is not easy to serve Jesus. It's not. Anybody who says it isn't really serving Jesus, because it's a difficult thing to do. We have to die to ourselves every day and follow him wherever he wants us to go, even to our crosses that we have to bear. But if we do it, our Father will honor us. Think about that. You want to be honored by God? Follow Jesus. Like Mary, everything you have, and worship at his feet. Jesus said, now my soul is troubled, and what shall I say? Can you imagine? Everybody's talking about how great he is. They're throwing a palm. They're singing Hosanna. They're giving him attributes. And he is in anguish. He's hurting. And what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? No, he says, it was for this very reason that I came to this hour. Jesus, as you go to the end of John chapter 12, talks about how he did everything God wanted him to do. That's why he's getting ready to be glorified. Listen to this. Jesus says, Father, glorify your name. And a voice comes from heaven and says, I have glorified it and will glorify it again. Because Jesus did what God wanted him to do. The crowd that was there, they heard it. They said it had thundered, and others said an angel had spoken to him. Again, they didn't get it. They didn't see it. Jesus explains to them, the voice was for your benefit, not mine. Now is the time for judgment on this world. Now the prince of this world will be driven out. Jesus is getting ready to be the victorious king that they're proclaiming him to be, just not in the way that they were expecting him to do it. And he said, when I'm lifted up from the earth, I will draw all people to myself. How true is that statement? He said this, John says, to show the kind of death he was going to die. And the people there understood that. Listen to what they say. They said, we've heard from the law that the Messiah will remain forever. So how can you say the Son of Man must be lifted up? Who is this Son of Man? You see their blindness. They're not getting it. And Jesus told them, you're going to have the light just a little while longer. Walk while you have the light before darkness overtakes you. Whoever walks in the dark doesn't know where they're going. You don't have to really explain that, do we? You ever try to walk around with your eyes closed? Just for fun? I'll stand out here sometimes in the morning praying for all of you, and I kind of go through the deal, and I'll close my eyes, and the next thing I know, the direction I think I'm going is not the direction I'm really going. And when you trip over these chairs, they will make you fall. Just saying. Jesus said, believe in the light while you have the light, so that you may become children of light. And when he finished speaking, he left and hid himself from them. I'm losing my voice. I'm way over time. The light wasn't just over the next few days. The light did not go out when Jesus died on the cross. The light shines brighter today because he has given us the Holy Spirit. The light is with us until the time of God's judgment comes on this earth. And I'm telling you, that's not very long from now. You look at what's going on in the world, and I think you could have done that 50 years ago, 100 years ago. But at some point in time, when we look and see what's going on in the world, and Jesus said it's like a fig tree. When it starts to produce fruit, you know summer's coming. Let me tell you something. Summer's coming. And we need to walk in the light while we still have opportunity to walk in the light before Jesus doesn't give us that opportunity anymore. One more verse. Actually, two. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 2 tells us that we need to be fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and pioneer of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning the shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Fixing our eyes on Jesus. That's what Mary did. She was willing to give everything she had to honor Jesus for who he was and what he had done in her life. She wasn't looking for more things. She wasn't looking for any kind of glory for herself. She didn't care. She just wanted to pour it all out for Jesus. And until we're willing to do that, make Jesus the main thing in our lives, we don't really have hope. You wonder why you don't have joy sometimes? Because your eyes are not on Jesus. They're on your problems. They're on the challenges. They're on what you wish you had. Fix your eyes on Jesus. Consider Him who endured such opposition from sinners. All the people that arrested Jesus and beat Jesus and yelled for Barabbas instead of Jesus and did all of those things. They're not the only ones who were the sinners that He endured the treatment from. That's you and me too, my friends. It's you and me too. But consider Him when we think we can't do any more. When we think we've had enough of all of it. Consider Him. Look what He did. Look what He's doing. And look what He has promised to do. So that you will not grow weary and lose heart.